Hi, and welcome to Spooky Hours. My name is David Saunderson, and today we're joined by special guest Gregor Stewart, who is a paranormal investigator and historian author in Fife, Scotland. How are you, Greg?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I've asked you to join us today because very interested in the book that you've published in the last year called Witch Memorials of Scotland, and I was very interested in the idea of the fact there are witch memorials in Scotland. How did that all come about? You writing a book like that?
Yeah, I've been interested with the witch trials in Scotland since I was quite young. My grandfather first introduced me to the paranormal field because he was a specialist gold leaf worker. So he worked in places like Falkland Palace, where he did the chapel and the king's bedroom ceiling. So when he was working in these places, he would come back with stories from the staff about things that had been happening there. I used to like to stay with him at the weekend, and he would fill my mind with these stories. I was raised in St Andrews, which is really quite a paranormal area, so that got me interested there. But what my grandfather told me about was a place called the Nino Den, just outside St Andrews. Now that's a place of ancient Druid worship. Now to me, as sort of a wee 10-year-old boy, a Druid was a wizard. It was what you would now imagine as a Harry Potter
Yeah.
type wizard. So that spiked my interest in the witch trials and the witches wizards of Scotland. When I went on to high school, being of the age where I didn't have access to internet and things like that for my studies, we were quite lucky in that I got access to St Andrews University Library. Now, in there, I found a section on witchcraft, which had all the old historical books dating back to the 1800s, covering the witch trial period. So it was about that stage that I first started getting interested in the trials properly.
So, how many how many witch memorials are there in Scotland?
It depends on what you call or what you term as a memorial. There are more that I'm finding about even after I've written the book. A lot of the memorials are simple stones, which are placed, in a place of execution, or a significant area for the witch trials. I think there's about 12 or 13 I cover in the book itself, which are more specific to a particular trial. There are some famous ones in Scotland. There is actually a campaign for a national memorial at the moment, which I'm part of as well, which is the Remembering the Accused Witches of Scotland. They have a memorial ready to go. They actually have the memorial, they just need the land to put it on. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of spots, but as I say, it tends to just be a simple stone rather than a significant memorial. Probably the only significant memorial is the Maggie Wall Memorial, which has been done in Perthshire.
Okay. Can you tell us really about the Maggie Wall and what that was about? We have a story on Spooky Isles about that.
Yes.
I think you wrote about that. I'm pretty sure you would have written about that at one stage. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, Maggie Wall it's quite a curious memorial. It's a quite a large memorial out of stone that's all stapled together with steel staples. It says on it that Maggie Wall burnt here as a witch, but curiously, it also has a cross on the top. Now, any memorial to an accused witch wouldn't normally have a Christian cross on the top. Bear in mind, it was Christianity that was persecuting them. Also, there's no record of Maggie Wall in the witch trial. She didn't actually exist. I've done quite a lot of research into the area, and there is a wood that used to be called Maggie Wall's Wood nearby. So it's almost certain that there was a lady called Maggie Wall, but nobody knows who she was or what her history is. What the theory is the memorial was actually put up dedicated to all the witches or accused witches in the area rather than one specific woman, and it just took the name of the area, which was Maggie Wall, rather than
about her. Okay, so Maggie Wall might not necessarily have been a witch.
No.
She's just a person that they're calling it a bit like calling it the Glasgow Memorial or something
exactly,
like that.
Yeah.
So
it's just curious wording because it does say was burnt here as a witch, but it may mean that all the women, that might be the birthplace. All of them were burnt.
What years are we talking about here?
It was 1563. Mary Queen of Scots brought in the Witchcraft Act in Scotland. It was tighter than the Witchcraft Act that they had in England, in that it went further to say that just helping a witch or speaking to a witch was punishable with death as well. So what that meant was that if your wife was accused of witchcraft, you could do nothing to help her, because if you tried to help her in any shape or form, and she was then convicted of witchcraft, it meant you too were convicted. So you would face the same penalty, which was to be normally you'd be strangled and then burnt, but in extreme cases they'd burn you at the stake alive.
Okay. So how widespread was this? How this is obviously a terrible law. How many executions and burnings and strangulations were there?
Yeah, I mean the trials, the records are a bit scant. They reckon there's between 3,000 and 4,000 people were executed. Scotland killed more people per head of population than virtually any country in the world.
And why do you think that was? Is that a sort of a strict Presbyterian sort of Church of Scotland type of thing?
It was the timing wasn't good. When Mary Queen of Scots wrote the Witchcraft Act, Scotland was going through its reformation from Christianity, Catholic Christianity, to the Protestant faith. When Mary Queen of Scots came back from France, we were already starting to go through the converting from Catholic to Protestant. She came back as a Catholic queen to a country that was already half converted to Protestant. So there is a theory that's partly why she brought in the Act in the first place, because the Protestant faith allowed women slightly more rights and freedom than they had under the Catholic faith. So she was trying to force them to go back to being nice, obedient little ladies.
Yeah.
Always say. But yeah, I mean, there was a lot of money involved in it as well, because you, as a family member, if you were wealthy enough, after your wife or potentially your husband, if some men were burnt as well, after your family member was executed, you'd be presented with a bill. The bill could run into a lot of money, more than a year, 2 years salary. But you would be charged for right down to the wood and the coal to build the fire to burn them on.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of money to be made in towns. If they were running out of money, it was a good way to have a witch trial.
We often sort of see things here, like a lot of the history of witchcraft in England, with Matthew Hopkins, Witchfinder General,
yes.
a lot of highlighting of that, and so I suppose that's the way we think of witch trials, is what we see in England and maybe in Salem in America. What were witch trials, and what was it like in Scotland? How did they decide on who was a witch and who wasn't a witch?
The methods weren't too dissimilar. There was torture used, certainly. Once you were accused, you'd be taken to the local toll booth jail normally, or wherever they held the prisoners. You would be asked if you were involved in witchcraft. Obviously, at that point, you would say no. They would then start to go through the evidence to see if there was enough to send you to trial. If you reached trial, you would suffer things like sleep deprivation. That was the main torture, was just not letting you sleep, which, that alone was enough to drive a lot of people insane, enough to actually admit what they were being told. There'd be very, very guided questions put to you about your involvement, and the hope that you slip up and maybe give the wrong answer in your sleep-deprived state. If that didn't work, they would go on to more extreme measures. They would use thumb screws to crush your fingers, crush your toes. They had things that they called the booties, which I don't think they used in England, but they certainly used them in Scotland. They were metal or wooden boots, which basically was one big boot that both of your legs were put into, and they would then start hammering wedge-shaped pieces of wood into the top until they slowly crushed your legs. There is an account in North Berwick where a school teacher, it was probably the biggest trial in Scotland, King James VI himself oversaw the torture, and one of the school teachers who was accused, he had his legs crushed to the extent that they say that there was bone flying all over the place. He still would refuse to admit he was a witch, so they decided that the devil had given him the power to withstand the torture, which made him guilty.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't, basically.
Exactly, yeah. But probably the most feared method was the witch pricker, which they had in England as well, which they would use a pen about that long. They would take a pen and they would just push it into every inch of your body. They were looking for a mark. Normally, just a mole or something like that would be enough, a skin tag. But they were looking for an area where there was no pain, because the belief was that was where the devil put the mark on you to suckle his imps. So obviously a good witch pricker would know how to do it, and that he could go around in circles or something like that to numb all the nerves, and then nicely in the middle where there was no pain. They also used false prickers where they could switch it so the blade retracted so it didn't go into the skin. But a good witch pricker got paid by the hour, so it was not in their interest to find any mark on you.
So I'm assuming it like, does that hurt? Yes. It's basically they're pricking you everywhere, hoping that it'll hurt
your body, every single inch, even in unimaginable areas. They would prick them to try to find some place where you didn't scream with pain as it went in.
Okay, and also the question, how did they find these people? What were they saying that you're a witch? What were some of the accusations? How were they determining who was guilty to even start torturing?
Yeah, a lot of the times it was elderly people who started to become a burden to the community. Obviously back then, if you couldn't work, somebody else had to look after you, basically. So there was an easy way to get rid of them, and that was to accuse them of witchcraft. The sort of things people were accused of, it could be if there was a crop failure in the local area, the clergy would say there's a witch in the area. That would be the only possible reason for the crop failing. So people would then start getting suspicious of their neighbours, pointing fingers at each other. Just even having an argument. Sometimes you could have an argument with your neighbour, and your neighbour could go and then say you were a witch. And that was it. That was the start of the process. It was just really. This is why I say there is this theory that what Mary Queen of Scots was trying to do was oppress the women, because they became scared to speak their mind. They became scared again, because they knew if they shouted at their husband or shouted at their neighbour, they could then be accused of witchcraft and be hauled in and start.
Why do you think she wanted to do that then? What was in her interest to do that?
The belief is, or theory is, that she was trying to push women back to the Catholic faith rather than accept the Protestant faith, which gave them increased rights, more freedoms. Tried to push them back, fear God, worship God, to the tighter Catholic faith. And obviously it didn't work, and unfortunately the trials then continued right through the Protestant faith as well.
How long did you say it went from? It went from
1563 to 17. I'm going to say 1735.
That's a fairly long time, though. We're talking 70 years or something more than what's
yes.
that? 70 years this went for. So you said it was like 3,000 to 4,000. How widespread was it around Scotland? I mean, you're in in Fife, so you're on one side of the country. Well,
yep.
How widespread was it through the Highlands and the Lowlands?
It was everywhere. There wasn't an area that wasn't touched. The Highlands were probably where it lasted the longest. The last witch to be tried in Scotland was up in the Highlands. She was 17. I can't remember the date.
What was her name? What was her name?
She was Janet Horn.
Yeah. And so, obviously it went for a long time, but do we have the names of all the people? Because I mean, this conversation is about the memorials, and we remember them, and and we have to assume that they're all innocent, because witchcraft in itself should not be a crime unless there's actually something criminal, like they're murdering people or something like that. Do we have the names of all the people that were executed?
We have the names of a lot of them. There is a database from Edinburgh University, which it's an excellent resource if anyone's wanting to look into the witch trials. It's got an interactive map as well, so you could actually go into anywhere in Scotland and it'll show you how many witches and give you the names of them. The records are very scant, though. They reckon there's a lot more witches or accused witches that were killed. They were being deemed so low in society that they weren't worth recording in the records. Some of the records just make reference to 5 women were burnt as witches. You know, they don't even give you their names. There were records lost as well through the Reformation, which unfortunately meant that the names were lost. But there's about 3,500 on record, but there was definitely more.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that, because I mean, you see the birth record or the baptism records in Scotland do not have, some of the older ones don't have the mother's name on them. It might just say a child of such and such, as a man, you know, whether they name them the child. So if they didn't consider the mother worthy of it, they're hardly likely to worry about someone they've just tortured and executed.
A lot of the historical records just refer to them as wretched creatures and things like that, you know.
Yeah,
that was somebody's mum, wife, daughter, but in the records they were just wretched creatures.
So that's why it's obviously, you know, if we're talking, even if we're talking one person, but never mind 3,000 or 4,000 people that have been tortured and murdered as part of some kind of political campaign by the monarch. These memorials, and you were saying that a lot of them are just maybe rocks that have been put together.
Yeah.
How can you tell that they're memorial? I'm just saying.
They have. I mean, Janet Horne, 1727. She was, I say, the last one. She was killed in 1727. There is a stone marking the spot that she was burnt. Now it has the date 1722 on it, so it's actually got the wrong date again on it. But it's known from the records that was the spot that Janet was burnt on. There are other stones as well that simply have a basic message or a name on it, or in the case of Janet, just a date on it. So people can associate them with a particular trial.
Have you been to all these memorials that you've got in the book?
I've been to many. I haven't actually been to Janet Horne's, but I've been to a lot of them round about. I've been up to Maggie Wall and places like that.
And what did you find? What do they all have in common?
Strangely, they're eerily quiet when you get to the areas. I'm saying eerily quiet. It's my dog's barking in the background, making it quite noisy. But yeah, I mean, there's kind of a lot of people report when they get there. I don't think it's anything paranormal. I'm not going down that line, but you know, it's just this. It's a place of sadness, because suddenly you start to realise that, you know, you're standing where somebody was horrifically killed for probably doing nothing at all. They tend to be quite remote. You know, they're not in centres or towns or anything like that. The Janet Horne one's in somebody's garden, but at the time it was put there.
Well, just made me think, Greg. What were executions like back then, though? Were they particularly more the witches, or, you know, because normally I would think they just hang someone, but these ones seem to be a bit.
No, in Scotland they didn't hang them. In Scotland they believed that your power was in your blood, so they had to destroy the blood. So the only way to do that was through burning. They were pretty horrific, but they were also a fanfare, you know, a celebration for the town, if you like. That's one of the reasons that they like to have them every now and again, because if there was kind of not much happening in the town, people started to get a bit bored. And it's horrible to put it that way, but, you know, let's have a witch burning. You know,
did they do that to like normal criminals? Like if you were done for stealing sheep or shooting a man, would you have
not burnt or anything to that extent? But I mean, a lot of the trials of women would be, or the men, because there was plenty of men as well, would be dragged through the town. Sometimes stood in a barrel of oil, where the audience, the locals, could all throw things at them as they pulled through in a horse and cart, up to a waiting fire, where they would be just put on. If they were lucky, they'd get strangled first, as I say.
Yeah. So it was really, I mean, I'm not going to say personal, but they really took a lot of, whoever was doing the executions were having a bit of fun with it, really, from their point of view, it sounds.
Absolutely, yep. I mean, there was a lot of good money to be made at this. And that's why a lot of people took up they took up employment as witch finders.
Yeah.
Because of the amount of money they could get. There was actually a woman took up a job as a witch pricker, which wasn't allowed, but she had disguised herself as a man, and she was very successful at what she did.
Have you ever compared what happened in Scotland for your knowledge of what happened in England and other places? Because you said that they did a lot more per capita in Scotland than they did elsewhere.
Yeah.
How do you feel about what happened in Scotland compared to the rest of the world?
I think Scotland is, it always has, or certainly back then, was always a very religious place, a very superstitious place as well, which I think's fed a lot into it. Even today, there's places across the Highlands and Islands where it's deemed not suitable to be working on a Sunday and things like that. There's still that much faith in the Christian faith. So I think that was what was behind an awful lot of it. That folklore still rife in a lot of the islands and things like that. So that's why I think there was more going on up here. You're talking about very remote communities that probably never ventured outside their own community. In the places like down in England where there was a far higher population, people probably quickly or more quickly moved on from it, realised it's not actually true. Whereas in the more remote communities up in the Highlands and Islands, people still feared it. They were still scared of what was going on. You've got to always remind people that because when you're talking about this, you think it's horrific. How could somebody do this? But you've got your king and you've got the church both telling you this is real. You don't have access to books. You probably can't even read, even if you did have access to books. So when you're shown the crops has failed, and the leader of your community, that being the minister, tells you there's a witch in the area, you're going to believe it. Because that's what everyone is telling you.
There's no reason to disbelieve it.
No, exactly.
Okay. So what did bring about the change in the 70 years later in the 1700s? What changed the mood in Scotland to move away from these witch burnings?
It was more, places like Edinburgh and Glasgow, they'd gone through the Act of the Union with England, so that's what made cities like Glasgow pretty wealthy again. They suddenly had access to all the import-export markets of the British Empire at that point. So they started to move away from the old beliefs and started to open themselves up to the whole world, started to realise that, this probably isn't actually true and there isn't witchcraft. So it moved from the cities up through the country. I say Janet was the last one up in Dornoch, but there was actually a man in Dornoch that was executed after the end of the witch trials, and he was hung for killing somebody he believed to be a witch. He thought he was legitimate in killing her because in his mind she was still a witch. So even after everyone else had moved on from it, up in the Highlands there was still a strong belief.
Okay. Well, with this book, it obviously highlights this whole thing because I didn't know that. I assume there were probably witch trials in Scotland, but no different to England. But it seems a lot more vicious and a lot more widespread in Scotland. Do you think people know this in Scotland of what happened?
No, I don't think people know it at all. That's part of the reason. Remembering the accused witches of Scotland, people are trying to get a memorial put up. There's also a campaign for a national pardon for the accused witches in Scotland, but I think people don't have a clue. They walk past some of these memorials are just the stone ones, not realising what happened there. I think that's why when you get to some of them and you actually know what that stone or marker symbolises, it's one of these moments where you suddenly think, oh, I had no idea this happened here.
Okay, well, what we'll do is in the sort of description for this, if you could give us the links, we'll put the links in for these campaigns to get pardons and all that, because I think people would be interested in supporting that, because it is something that is a slight on the on the country, basically, I think.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
my mother's Scottish, and so I feel that. So and I just think that it's something that it's a disgrace, and that's why it's important that the memorials are there to show what people can do. Even the good people of Scotland do that. So anyway, well, thanks for that, Greg. We'll definitely put in the link to the book so people could see that,
Yeah,
and
perfect.
we'll make sure that people know about this issue. So thanks
Yeah,
very much for
perfect.
talking to us, and look forward to maybe talking to you again about your work with Scottish Paranormal and some other things that you're doing. Okay.
Yep, look forward to it. Thank you very much.
No worries. Take care. Bye bye.
See you soon. Bye.